Hi Year 10, welcome to Biomes Lesson 12. This will be our last lessons on the biomes topic, so we're going to get through our last question on that worksheet. The last thing we're going to look at is contemporary management strategies, and we're going to look at the key term evaluate. Contemporary management strategies are all about strategies that are currently being implemented to protect an ecosystem, and in this case, we're going to look specifically at the Great Barrier Reef. You will also need to know some contemporary management strategies for your own ecosystem case study. Some of the management strategies we're going to look at are listed on the side here. There are many other strategies being used to try and protect the reef, and you're welcome to do your own research and find some information out on those, but these are the ones we're going to have a look at today. As I mentioned, the key term for today is evaluate. Now this really is just a step up from the assessment we did last lesson. Evaluate also means to make a judgment, but we need to take it one step further and base our judgment on criteria. Now, here are some of the connecting terms you can use, and they're the same that you would use for assess because you're making a judgment, but these are some more specific sentence starters for evaluate. Now, like I said, it's really important you make a judgment and base it on criteria. So what might criteria look like? Criteria really is just reasons for your judgment. In geography and in this topic, it might include things like it's a beneficial strategy because it helps to preserve the heritage value or the intrinsic value, utility value of an ecosystem. Or it might be a negative or non-beneficial strategy because it doesn't create inter or intra-generational equity. It might be a helpful strategy because it improves functioning. Or it might be a damaging strategy because it damages functioning. So really you're just putting some sort of caveat, some sort of reason behind your judgment, and it needs to be specific to this topic. Other topics you do in geography might have other criteria, other subjects you do might have other criteria, but this is some good criteria for this topic. The first contemporary strategy we're going to look at is around policies and some sort of legislation that helps to protect the Great Barrier Reef. The Great Barrier Reef was established as a World Heritage Site in 1981, and this means that the Queensland Government must cooperate with the Australian Federal Government and the United Nations to protect the reef. They are legally obliged to. One of the World Heritage System's main aims is to promote education and importance of the reef's protection and how fragile the reef is. And there's been a lot of talk in the media at the moment about changing the status of the Great Barrier Reef to endangered, and that's all through the World Heritage Convention. Unfortunately, that wasn't passed yet because the federal government has agreed to do some minor protective measures. The other main agency that protects the Great Barrier Reef is the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, the GBRMPA, and they advise the federal government on how the reef should be managed. When any visitor goes to the reef, they pay a small fee to the agency, which is used to help undertake education programs and to manage the reef. The second strategy we're going to look at is zoning. All of the reef is split into different zones depending on what activity can take place there. Because the reef is such a large structure, we have to specify what activities can occur in which areas. For example, commercial fishing is only allowed in some parts of the reef, tourism is only allowed in some parts of the reef. And this is done to try and promote intergenerational equity, which means we'll preserve the reef for future generations to use and see in the same way that we have it now. Zoning seems to be a pretty effective strategy because in the areas that have been zoned off for, say, conservation, we're seeing an increase in fish numbers and corals slowly starting to recover. So when you look at maps of the Great Barrier Reef, you might see maps that look like this that have different areas zoned off with different symbols, and that's to designate what the area has been sort of zoned for. Has it been zoned for tourism? Has it been zoned for fishing? Or has it been zoned for conservation? The third strategy is permanent moorings for boats. There are lots of boats that use the reef for a variety of purposes. It might be tourist boats, it could be fishing boats, it could be scientific research boats. All of these boats have to anchor when they stop. And all of those anchors can cause damage to the coral structures when they're dropped into the reef. So what the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority has done is set up a range of permanent moorings which boats can attach themselves to. So there's just one anchor that has done its damage to the reef, and then boats will just connect to the anchor that already exists there. So here is an example of what those permanent moorings look like, and they're spread throughout the reef for boats to use. Because of zoning, which we talked about previously, there are lots of parts in the reef where boats can't anchor at all. But because the reef is so big, it's quite hard to police that. And so some people are still able to get away with anchoring where they shouldn't do. So moorings, I guess, are somewhat effective in protecting the reef. The fourth strategy is the tourism industry. Tourism is the most intensive human activity carried out on the reef now. But it's also a really important player when it comes to protecting the reef, because the tourism industry really wants to maintain the reef's utility value. If the reef was to decline in health, the utility value, or its monetary value, economic value, would decline, and that would not be good for the tourism industry. Tourism industry operators work very closely with the GBR MPA to develop programs that tourists can participate in during their visits. Some of those programs include citizen science programs such as Eyes on the Reef, where visitors are encouraged to collect information during their visit. They can download an app and upload photos of different parts of the reef that they visit, so that scientists can collate lots of evidence that people are just kind of collecting by default. People visit all different places in the reef, so scientists are able to get a really wide pool of data for them to look at. And as I said, it's really important for tourist operators to partake in this management, otherwise their livelihoods might be at risk in the future should the utility value of the reef decline. The next strategy we're going to look at is the 2050 Reef Water Quality Improvement Plan, and this is a document that is produced to try and set up goals for the reef to meet in terms of water health and water quality by 2050. It's mostly to do with the way that farming occurs and how we can prevent pollution from fertilizers, pesticides, and animal waste from impacting the reef. We know that coral has really specific criteria that they like to grow around the salinity, the turbidity, things like that. And waste from farming upstream can alter those conditions and damage the coral. So the Reef 2050 Water Quality Improvement Plan aims to negate some of those issues. The plan is working with farmers to reduce dissolved nitrogen and sediment runoff by up to 50% or 80% in some catchment areas. And the main aspects of the plan are to improve ecosystem health, biodiversity, water quality, maintain its heritage value, things like that. So the water quality plan is working towards a lot of different criteria to try and improve the health of the reef. The second last strategy we're going to look at is Project Catalyst, and that's a community-based project that's underway in North Queensland. And it's where a town called Tully is working with the World Wildlife Fund to reduce the amount of chemical pollutants that come off its sugarcane. Now, sugarcane is a very big industry for North Queensland because it grows so well in their tropical conditions. So they are working with farmers to try and change the type of fertilizer that's used on the sugarcane. One initiative includes using organic cow manure as fertilizer instead of chemically based fertilizers. It's estimated that by doing this, 150 billion litres of water has improved in quality. That means that there's less nitrogen and less carbon being filtered downstream to impact the reef and the coral. The last strategy is one we've talked about in a couple of different lessons, and that's the Ranger Bot. The Ranger Bot was developed by the Queensland University of Technology, and it's working to eradicate the crown of thorn starfish cots from the reef. What the Ranger Bot does is go and search the reef for crown of thorn starfish and inject them with a lethal injection to kill them. What this bot does is try and eradicate the pest that the crown of thorn starfish is to try and restore some health to the reef. Okay, that was a pretty quick overview of quite a few different management strategies. What you need to do is attempt one question today, the last question, question 26 on your worksheet, and it will ask you to evaluate a contemporary management strategy. Now, what you need to do is pick one of those strategies or your own and get some really good detail on it, enough to write about 22 lines or 8 marks worth of information. And make sure that you're really trying to evaluate your strategy. You need to make a clear judgment on whether the strategy is positive or negative, beneficial, harmful, and what the reasons for your judgment is. Is it because it will help with intrinsic, utility, or heritage value? Will it help to promote inter or intra-generational equity? Will it help to promote functioning or biodiversity? You need to make sure that you provide really clear reasons or criteria for your judgment. Once you've answered question 26, you are done with your Biomes worksheet. And that worksheet is your best preparation for your assessment task in week 9. If you have any missing questions that you've kind of missed along the way because you were away or you ran out of time, please make sure you do spend some time catching up on those questions so that I can release the sample answers to you. Okay, When you've done this question, make sure you submit done on Schoolbox so I can send you the sample answers for today and you can mark your work. The rest of your time now can be spent working on your case studies.